Alarm bells first sounded during the oral arguments held at the Supreme Court last December in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization. In that case, which challenged the state law that banned most abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy, Justice Kavanaugh suggested that why should the Supreme Court be the arbiter rather than Congress or the state legislatures? In other words, why should the Supreme Court decide the matter of abortion? Now, 5 months later, after someone from the Supreme Court leaked Justice Alito's draft opinion in Dobbs, it indicated that a 5-4 majority of the Supreme Court seems poised to strike down the 1973 decision in Roe v. Wade, which found that a woman's right to an abortion was protected by a number of articles of the United States Constitution. If Justice Alito's opinion holds, it would strike down Roe v. Wade through an analysis that concludes that abortion is not and has never been a right in the Constitution, and it will return the process to the states. Nancy, there are a lot of layers to unpack here, not only about the decision, but about the impact on the nation and our state. But, I guess the global question is, what is the impact that the decision will have on women?
Well, obviously, what has happened already in these states that have enacted these restrictions is that, women are the ones, particularly people of poverty, people with less access to means to travel. They're the ones who are going to be most affected by this. Is it going to encourage mail order abortion, which is what is occurring now and is available now? Maybe. There's a lot of interstate travel going on. But I want to make one thing clear. Nobody thinks that abortion is a great idea. Nobody's going, Ray, yay, I can have an abortion. Nobody wants to have an abortion. But sometimes it's necessitated by a woman's situation. And I think, that's something to keep in the background as we're talking about. It's a terrible thing to have to go through. And now these women are going to be forced to go through different machinations now to address their situation. Abortions are not going to end. Yeah, this brings me back to when I was in college when Roe v. Wade was issued. Everybody knew somebody who'd gone to a back alley abortionist, gone to another state, gone to another country. That's going to continue, and it's going to create an unhealthy environment for women across the country. If states are permitted to set the rules, Maryland will be, a welcoming place for that. But it's no way for people to live, and it's a terrible decision, and it has grave implications, of course, for every other decision that the court has ever issued that is not supported by clear language in the Constitution.
Well,
that's what we're going to get into here.
We'll get to that in a minute. But once again, this demonstrates the tug of war between federalism, between states' rights and federalism and the Constitution. So, Mark, how does this sort of play out in the initial political landscape that we're seeing?
I think there's an important other dimension to this, which is that there's policy questions, political questions, and then there are judicial questions. And so while you can make the argument for on a policy side, which obviously Maryland legislators have adopted, what the court is faced with is determining whether or not abortion is required as a matter of law, given the language of the Constitution. Now, Roe v. Wade, when it originally was decided, came down on the side that there was a right of privacy that was implied, but not expressed, not implicit in the court, in the Constitution, and that's where Roe v. Wade, and that has been for nearly 50 years now, has been a subject of considerable controversy. One way to think about it is constitutional rights are very specific. They're rights that prohibit the government from doing something, as opposed to the sort of notional policy rights, the right to food, right to shelter that we sometimes talk about. And Nancy put her finger on a kind of a key point, which is that in many states, most states actually, abortion will continue to be available. There's no suggestion that the court will eliminate abortion. It will simply allow it to go back to the states. And on that question, there are kind of a variety of outcomes. Arguably, in Maryland, if it went back to the state, Maryland would have a more, how shall I say, generous abortion law than a federal law, if that were to come forward. So I think the important point is that this is not as much a policy question about abortion per se, since it will undoubtedly continue, as it is recognition that this isn't an issue that really the court should decide. It's one that should be left to legislators and to decide for themselves.
Well, let's follow that track just a little bit, Nancy, because as Mark indicated, here in Maryland, the Maryland legislature acted very quickly, given the pace of legislatures after Roe v. Wade. And Governor Schaefer actually in 1991 signed into law a right to abortion up to the moment of viability. And of course, viability is still a term that is subject to some debate, and we did have a constitutional, I guess, definition here in Maryland. So we're not going to see a great impact here in Maryland, and in fact, in our last legislature, some of availability for having reproductive health decisions were expanded. So could you comment on that?
Well, those additional resources, of course, that was vetoed by Mr. Hogan. It was adopted by the legislature. Now he's declined to fund it, or at least reduce funding significantly. Now, that's another conversation about his political objectives, I think. But the fact remains that Maryland is going to be a welcoming place. But the people voted. I mean, there was a referendum on this. This is not a purely political decision made in a legislature in a dark room or by a court. This was a referendum voted on by the people of Maryland. So this is a secure right and situation that, I don't think there's an issue in Maryland with respect to access to abortion. I think the real issue is how it's going to play out in the next election. I think that's going to be relevant because Democrats are going to come out to vote.
Well, that's I think the political considerations are something we're going to have to look at.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, if for most people up until the leak of this decision, abortion was not in the top 5 of their reasons for wanting to go to the polls. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Mark, earlier, Nancy talked about the suggestion, and other pundits have come out with this line of argument that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that there are other rights that are in jeopardy that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And is that a real threat, or is that just a perceived threat?
I think that's a perceived threat. If you look at sort of the significant case law on sort of racial equity, on voter, I mean, there is very firm basis in Constitution. Basically, the 14th Amendment. I mean, we go down the various amendments to the Constitution where many of these rights come from. So I'm not sure that that's really a strong case, and I'm not thinking of a particular right that has been as controversial. I mean, we talked about, yes, I appreciate the sentiment here in Maryland. This has been a very polarizing issue for now 50 years, for basically closing on 2 generations, arguably. And it is fascinating when you look at the polling data, how you ask this question ends up creating kind of a range of responses. It's very important, yes, that if you do ask the basic question, do you support a right to choose, you will get a majority. I think that, it's really just a statement of fact. When you parse it out with, do you support late-term abortion, do you support sort of, various kinds of restrictions, you do get different responses. And again, how you phrase that. But I do think, again, if it's a political question, an issue of political will, there is majority sentiment for a right to abortion. The issue is kind of how it would be structured if there were limitations. restriction.
Well, I want to follow up on your observation and go to Nancy on this. The American Bar Association released a statement on this and saying that and quoting from law professor Lawrence Tribe, that there are possibly other rights that may come under scrutiny as a result of Roe, and in particular, gay marriage. That, you know, for a long period of time, that too was treated as a state's issue until Justice Kennedy wrote his opinion a few years ago, saying that there was a right to gay marriage on the national level. And I think that's what is striking. So Nancy, you want to comment on that?
I would push back on that in that particular case. There was a 14th Amendment claim based on marriage, recognition of marriage being a government record. You know, it takes the government. If it were just individuals by themselves, it would be a separate issue. So
let me ask you on this.
Yeah.
Well, I do think it's a slippery slope. And if you look at the draft opinion, Alito dances around it, said, oh, no, this is not like those things. So he did make an effort to distinguish the abortion issue from other kinds of cases. But I got to say, creative litigators are going to pursue this now. They really opened the door so much for stare decisis. That is the issue. And that's the legal issue that is going to raise for many people. How much of the Supreme Court decisions can we count on going forward from this court? You know, it's a really big deal. I'm an attorney.
The court's not infallible. You know, let's face it, the court is not infallible. I mean, you know, the Dred Scott decision is, you know, the perfect example that is always cited about the fallibility of the court.
Well, that's the easy one.
There are limits to stare decisis, so I don't want to get caught up in those weeds. The last question, and I think this is one that as the protests have played out since the leak, how should we view the leaker and what that person did, he or she did, in releasing this? Are they a hero or are they a villain? I'll let you both comment, and then we have to go to break.
Well, I'll say my husband was a Supreme Court law clerk, and he is appalled. We in this household are appalled that this could occur, but there's precedent for it, and it was leaked before, as the pundits say, in Roe versus Wade. So it's happened before. The world isn't going to come to an end, but to make it so clear that the court understands the political nature of the situation and is playing to someone's hands, that I think is upsetting and unfortunate.
Mark, you have 30 seconds.
Again, I think the challenge is looking to the Supreme Court to be a kind of super legislature, as opposed to allowing what are predominantly political questions to be resolved either at Congress or in state legislatures. And it reflects how we've projected in the Supreme Court this notion that these, again, political questions, policy questions that divide us are going to be resolved by the Supreme Court.
Well, we're getting the sign. I want to thank you both for a very thoughtful discussion of an enormously important issue. When we come back from this short break, why are opioid deaths continuing to rise here in Maryland? Stay tuned.